is a great privilege for Team Asian Confluence to honor and warmly welcome our esteemed dignitaries and guests this evening to the inaugural edition of our signature conversations. We are deeply honored to have with us His Excellency Mr. Philip Green, OAM, Australian High Commissioner to India, Professor C. Raja Mohan, visiting research professor at the National University of Singapore and advisor to Asian Confluence, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, Governing Council, Asian Confluence and Distinguished Fellow at Gateway House, Mr. Bernard Lynch, Consul General, Australia, Kolkata. To mark the occasion and as a reflection of the warmth and tradition of our center, may I now request Dimitria, our research intern, to kindly honor our distinguished dignitaries with the traditional Utturyo. His Excellency, Mr. Philip Green. Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. Professor C. Raja Mohan. Mr. Bernard Lynch. Professor Susan Marks. Mrs. Francisca Budianti. Oh. Okay. Mrs. Kumkum Bhatia. Mrs. Nirmala George. We also extend a very warm welcome to the distinguished delegates from the Australian High Commission in India and all our esteemed guests from Shillong, partners, colleagues, and all those who've taken the time to join us this evening. It is our pleasure to host you to this event. The theme for today's conversation is the Indian Ocean and the Bay of Bengal, emerging contours in Australia-India partnership, engaging the Northeast Indian states. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite Mr. Sabyasachi Datta, Executive Director, Asian Confluence, to please take the conversation forward.
A very, very good evening and warm greetings from the Asian Confluence. High Commissioner Philip Green, Consul General, Professor Raja Mohan, Ambassador Bhatia. It's really a pleasure and an honor to welcome you here to this extremely, I think, timely and enriching event that we hope everybody will be enjoying today. I also would like to extend a warm welcome to Professor Susan Marks and, of course, Ambassador Mrs. Nirmala George and Kumkum Bhatia ji. We also are here joined by this a very select and eclectic audience from Shillong. Of course, you know some of them, and we have Kong Patricia Mukim, the editor of the Shillong Times. We have Professor Nalin Mehta, who heads the NIGRIMS, Ambassador Riwad Wajri, former diplomat, and people from the media, academia. We have principals of different institutions and colleges here, students of international relations, people from the arts and the culture, field of arts and culture, And if if I've missed anything, just and also we have Professor Batskem Mirbo, who is now going to be contesting in the next Lok Sabha election. So we'll soon probably see him as one of our representatives in Parliament. And also people across from who are working across the region. So this is it's what we call the third space, where we have such intimate heart-to-heart discussions. And it is really an honor for us to welcome you, High Commissioner Green, to this to Asian Confluence. And a little bit of a backgrounder. As I welcome you to this city of Shillong, it's also Professor Raja Mohan's first visit to Shillong. This is a historic town. Shillong used to be the capital of undivided Assam. It is still one of the educational hubs of the northeastern region. Shillong's institutions attracted more in the past from across the neighborhood, including Myanmar and Bangladesh. We have many colleges and institutions here, so it is really a melting pot in the field of education. The first carpentry school in the region came up in Don Bosco in Shillong. Just when you got up the hill, there's a statue there that's Don Bosco. So a lot of history, and let's also remember that the Northeast, what we call the Northeast now, was a very connected region in the past. The rivers, the Brahmaputra and the rivers near, we had a lot of trade. It was connected to the Bay of Bengal. There were ships plying. And there was, let's not forget a history of great connectivity that existed not so far in the distant past. Shillong served as a hub and a capital of that ecosystem in the past. Many of the royal families who had, including the Tripura, Bijni, Sydney, they all had their residences here in Shillong because of its warm climate. And the governor's house here in Shillong has witnessed many accords, including the accession of Manipur, so many other things. So drawing from history, of course, we all know that this region was fragmented with the partition and all of that. But history still remains, I think, one of our biggest teachers, on what was possible, what could happen, what can happen, and how we can go forward in the future. And it is with that, as we learn and we take our responsibilities forward, we have to look at our geography. And so it is with this thought in mind that learning from history and acknowledging that geography is king, that we in the Asian Confluence have set up this, as a think tank, set up this Center for Bay of Bengal Studies, under which banner we are hosting this program today. Why geography? Shillong is not so far away from the Bay of Bengal. The Northeast is, of course, as you know, one of the, it's a landlocked as such, but it's very short distance away from the Bay of Bengal. At an ecological level, we get the first monsoon clouds, which hit so that's why it's the highest rainfall in the world. At many levels we have, though we are in the mountains, we have a maritime connection, if one can say. And again, from the past, oil, timber, they all found their way to trade through the rivers and through the other routes through the Bay of Bengal. So connectivity to the Bay of Bengal, what happens in the Bay of Bengal region is vital to the security, development, prosperity, growth of this entire region. And when we talk about Bay of Bengal, it's of course part of the northern Indian Ocean, Northeast Indian Ocean, if I may say so. And so I think as we connect the dots, all the way from the Himalayas to the waters, there are so many rivers that connect this region. So we need to probably have conversations around regional issues, local issues affecting regional problems, global solutions to local issues, local solutions to regional issues, and all the intermix of all of the above. So it is with that this center works, and we are really, really so happy and so honored and so blessed, I would say, that we have such a distinguished gathering and such a distinguished set of speakers here today to address us. A note on Australia, High Commissioner, during COVID, we did our first webinar actually with the Australian consulate in Kolkata. It has a report which had a whole host of recommendations on how the Northeast India and Australia can engage. One of them was a recommendation of having a scholar in residence program, which we actually took forward, and we hosted 2 scholars last year from Australia, taking them around the region, and one was the China expert and the other was a Myanmar expert, and it was a very, very enriching set of programs. There are also other issues that there are so many areas that Australia and India can bilaterally work in our common interests. We also note that the Australians' defense strategy has recently been there, and it's identified India as one of the main security partners. Of course, to quote you, Australia and India working in the Indian Ocean, as I saw from your article in the paper. So on that count, I think today's lectures, we have 3 lectures with a keynote by the High Commissioner and Professor Raja Mohan to set the overall context, and Ambassador Bhatia, who is a member of the Governing Council of Asian Confluence, and Professor Raja Mohan, who is one of our members of the advisory board. I think I will stop here, but just to say that I hope that, and we will have an interaction with all of us here to get the most out of the finest minds in the strategic world. Ambassador High Commissioner Green, of course, I mean, you're not only the High Commissioner of Australia to India, but I think one of the finest strategic thinkers, and and we are really honored to have you. And Professor Raja Mohan, I think many people are here to also, they follow you, read you, so really here. And Ambassador Bhatia, of course, to now invite him to set the context and the tone for today's evening. Ambassador Bhatia, of course, has been associated with Asian Confluence right from its inception, I would say. So nobody better than him to kind of set the tone for this conversation, which is the inaugural edition of a series we would like to do on a similar set of ideas. Thank you very much, and welcome again.
Thank you very much, Sabya. High Commissioner Philip Green, Professor Raja Mohan, Consul General, all the distinguished people here, but particularly Susan and Nirmala here. You almost scared the audience. There are not going to be 3 lectures. Let me assure you, there are going to be only 2 speeches or remarks. I will be very short. The whole idea is to hold people here rather than make them look to the door. But I must say I'm very delighted today by this function, and I'll therefore like to begin on a personal note, because all these 3 gentlemen who are sitting here have in a very special way contributed to this evening. Uh, I discovered Shillong through Asian Confluence over a decade back, and I'm visiting this after almost a gap of 5 years. And I would like to begin by paying a warm tribute to Professor B.B. Datta, whose vision it was to run a kind of a blend, Philip, of IIC and IHC of Delhi in this complex. And that vision is something on which Sabya, educated and worked in US over a long period, came back to realize. So it is really a father-son project which was envisaged by the father and delivered by the son. And so I think we really are all very proud of the fact that after years and years of work, I still remember I was still Director General of the Indian Council of World Affairs in Delhi when a mutual friend brought him, he is still young, but he was even younger then, to say that, Northeast, Shillong, Sabya, and we must do something on Asian confluence and look at this whole series of activities that they have been able to do, putting Northeast on the intellectual map of India in many ways. Professor Raja Mohan is undoubtedly one of the foremost scholars, thinkers, writers, and observers of the geopolitics and foreign policy. I'm amazed that he did his master's in nuclear physics and then shifted to international relations. So the loss of nuclear physics became the gain for people like us, foreign policy lovers and admirers. And I'm very happy that he's here. I think all of you would feel the same way that I feel about him. We read him every week. So we feel that we know him and his mind, even though we may not have really met him or talked to him. But today, after the event, you should talk to him. And what can I say about my very dear friend, Philip Green, except to say that our friendship was forged in the jungles of Africa. We went together to Kenya and we presented the credentials as High Commissioners of our countries to President Daniel Arap Moi. And next day, the Kenyan press was full of headlines about what the president had to say to one of us. And the entire diplomatic corps was, busy working out as to which of the two of us has annoyed him. Actually, neither of us had annoyed him. He was annoyed by his own esteem. But the reporting next day suggested that either Kenya-India or Kenya-Australia relations are in trouble. But that did not prevent us from working together. And obviously our governments must have noted this, because a few years later, again we found ourselves in the same role in South Africa. And I used to at that time wonder whether ever Philip would be selected to come to India. And lo and behold, he did come to India after a very successful stint as ambassador to Germany. So we indeed are very happy, Philip, to see you here. And we are looking forward to your inverted comma lecture. Dear friends, when you see a round table or seminar with a long title, you should be mentally ready. It's going to be a long evening. It's virtually in 2 or 3 sentences, which means that the host is a little unsure as to whether you understand what it's all about. So I would like to set the record straight in a very analytical manner and in a very crisp manner and in a very brief manner. I feel that first of all, when you come to Northeast India NER, we call it, we have to come in a very humble attitude, because this is one region of India which, first of all, is not peripheral. It is as central as Rajasthan is, or Kerala is, or New Delhi is. This is the region where the ideal of unity and diversity is fully and properly projected. This is a region which has seen considerable degree of stability, peace, security, and development, and yet it is a region which has a long way to go forward as well. And that's why people like you, who are active in different domains, occasionally have to come together under one roof and interact with people from the national capital to understand as to how we are doing and how we can do better. Obviously, NER's future depends mainly what our leaders do at the state level and at the national level, but it's also dependent on our equation with the neighborhood. It is also dependent on the larger geopolitical context, and on these things, I'm sure Professor Raja Mohan would throw ample light, and all that I can say is that when we look at the Northeast, we are looking at it in the context of India's relations with Bangladesh, Myanmar, Nepal, Bhutan, even China. There is always some sensitivity that don't talk about China in Northeast, but why not? They are there. And China is undoubtedly a major player in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, in the world. So if somebody wants to talk about it, there should be no hesitation about that either. My second point is about our vision and concept of Bay of Bengal community. We call it BOBC. It doesn't matter that Bay of Bengal's waters don't exactly wash the shores of Northeast. We are so close there. And this is that part of India which is deeply interested in the stakes and in the future of the Bay of Bengal community. And there we know we have our own regional organization, BIMSTEC, which has been moving along, but perhaps not in an optimal manner. So last year, when BIMSTEC held its summit once in 2 years, they presented a vision of 2030, where they said that they want a prosperous and resilient and free and open BIMSTEC region. These are, of course, big words. What do they actually mean in real terms? That is what we need to understand. And in that context, while we in Delhi are very keen to talk about the larger issue of the Indian Ocean and even the Indo-Pacific region, the fact is that for people beyond the circle of scholarship, some of these very fancy doctrines and concepts, they do not mean much, but they mean a lot to people like us. And therefore, we have to remember that Bay of Bengal as part of the Indian Ocean, which incidentally is the water that connects India to Australia. Because somebody said yesterday, he said, you're going to Shillong, what is the connection between Shillong and Sydney? Can you explain one connection? I said, Indian Ocean. And so we have to remember that we have to keep looking at the map to understand the connection. And this is where my last point is. I'm very happy that India-Australia relations have been progressing very well. I think in the last decade, the progress has been phenomenal. And without an exaggeration, I think one can say as an objective observer that this relationship is probably in a better state today than it ever was. And I'm not going again in any detail about the diplomatic, political, security, strategic aspects. I just want to highlight the fact two facts. One, the economic facets of this relationship are highly relevant to the needs and perceptions of the northeast region of India. Whether it is agriculture, sustainable development, mining, technology, innovation, there is so much more that Australian and Indian companies working together can achieve that we need to hear from our experts today on this aspect. And the second, it is the people-to-people connect. It comes to education and tourism in particular, capacity building. That is where the Australian and Indian players, if they increase their cooperation, they can achieve a lot. This is the broad context in which this roundtable dialogue has been curated and conceived today. And I'm very confident that the two speakers who are now coming to you, we will first invite Professor Raja Mohan to come and share his vision, his concept with us, and then, of course, the evening's star speaker, Australian High Commissioner, will be with you. Thank you very much.
Here today, this evening, with all of you for the first time in Shillong. My wife Nirmala and I, we were students in Jawaharlal Nehru University in the 70s. So we had a lot of students from the Northeast, really friends, colleagues in different ways. Used to hear quite a bit about Shillong, but never had a chance to come by here. But I think so it's really wonderful for me to be here in this historic city and what is really one of the core nodes of connectivity, knowledge, education in India's Northeast. So it's really great to be here, and thank you, Savya, for inviting me. I'm also thankful for Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia for his generous introduction and to share the panel with High Commissioner Philip Green. I mean, we were together in Singapore, since everyone is trying to look for connections with you, so we were at the same time in Singapore. So he's really been one of the most distinguished diplomats of Australia, and I think it's been great for India to have him here with us the last few years. What I thought I'll do is really in the next 15 or 20 minutes is really to focus on 5 broad themes, all of them kind of wound up out there in the complex title that we have. So essentially I would say a word about the Indian Ocean, then I'll say a few words about Bay of Bengal, then about the emergence of China, how all this transforms, what has been the nature of US response, and then look at what is India's choices and challenges as we look ahead. Now, I think to start with the Indian Ocean, school, the geography teacher tells us, the basic oceans in the world. There is Atlantic, Pacific, there is Indian Ocean, there is Arctic and Antarctic. But if you're a Navy or if you served in the maritime domain, they tell you, look, there's actually only one sea in the world. That this is not separate waters. Waters are connected. It is the in-between you have land, but really the world's waters are deeply connected. But I think purely for educational purposes or for delimiting our understanding of how we approach the study of these regions, it's good to separate them. But we shouldn't get overly fixated with the definition of these geographies, because as we debate there's Indian Ocean, there is Indo-Pacific, there is Bay of Bengal, but it's important to note all these are interconnected. And the geographic categories that we use are fluid in political terms. There are constant new terms that keep coming up. Now, if you ask our European friends, now they talk about Indo-Mediterranean as India's relationship with Italy and Greece have grown in recent years. Is the linkages between Eastern Mediterranean, the Gulf, and the Arabian Sea have come into view strongly. There are people who talk about Indo-Mediterranean. Indo-Pacific was a term that was not popular for a long time, but there it is today. And within this broad rubric, there are also other geographies that come up. Today we talk about Red Sea Zone, the Strait of Hormuz, or which actually the nature of politics in a local domain produce categories, and these categories are shifting all the time. But I think it's important to think of this as a contextual, referring to a certain period of time and a particular historic and political and economic context. And I think the peak of the idea of Indian Ocean and the Indian Ocean as an integrated domain was really with the British period. That where actually the Indian Ocean became the British lake after Britain defeated the French and the other European rivals. And you had actually, with India at the center of the Indian Ocean, which was a colony of the British India, with the British Empire, and that it was this relationship between Britain and India, one of the largest units in the world. I mean, at the time when it was integrated, when India became one, undivided India was one of the biggest physical entities in the international system, stretching from Aden to you have almost till Singapore at one point of time. So this was a vast, and including Burma at some points. So it's a vast zone that came together. And the resources of this vast landmass combined with the then sole superpower of the international system produced a structure and an order in the Indian Ocean as a structure of, you could understand in simple terms, in terms of trade, in terms of security, in terms of the overall political military developments. But this system got challenged with the rise of Japan. If you go back to the Second World War or the interwar period, the rise of Japan and Japan's challenge to the British domination of the Indian Ocean. The Northeast was very much part of that history, and the contestation between a rising power in the East. Because the story of rise of Japan was really, until then we had the European powers which came to the Indian Ocean from the West. Japan was the first Asian power to rise, and it came towards the Indian Ocean through Bay of Bengal, occupied the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, attacked through Burma, came all the way to the gates of Northeast. So it was a power that was coming from the East into the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean, and that was the big change that took place with the emergence of China, with the Japan. But the dominant power, Japan got defeated, and the U.S. became the dominant power. The U.S. dominance of the world order after 1945, unfortunately, involved a fragmentation of how we think about Indian Ocean. The Americans were coming from a different direction. So for them, the priority areas were the Pacific, the Western Pacific, especially there in the Northeast Asia, its alliances with Japan and Korea and Australia, and on the western side with Europe. So the Indian Ocean fell between the stools of the new American map. Though occasionally they've made forays into the region, most of them for the Middle East, a focus of securing their interests in the Middle East after the British withdrawal from the east of Suez. So the region since then has remained a fragmented one, and I think India's withdrawal, in some sense, after independence from this region. The partition of India weakened India's position in the region, and then India's withdrawal from an active role, both economically, geopolitically, and militarily, also produced a region that was no longer connected. So the longer term, it is with India's rise, and what India does, it is going to produce a connected Indian Ocean. So I think a lot depends on the next generation of Indians. I mean, how we think of reconstituting with India at the center. I mean, I think a more prosperous and secure Indian Ocean region that includes the east coast of Africa, right all the way to Australia, that this region can be transformed must be transformed through India's rise and what kind of policies that India will adopt. So that's the first point I wanted to make. Second, I think the Bay of Bengal, once the British dominated the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal became one of the most quietest areas in the world. That you had actually, though if you go back to the beginning of the 17th century or late 16th century, the early rivalries between the major European powers was mostly in Bay of Bengal, actually. As they were beginning to project themselves into the region, acquire foothold, the spice trade was mostly dealing with Aceh, the Indonesia, the struggle for the coast of Burma, the struggle for the coast of Tamil Nadu, what is now called the Carnatic coast at that time, and of course Bengal, which was really the prize, Bengal in a broadest sense. So Bengal, the Bay of Bengal was really a zone of contestation. But once Britain prevailed over the European rivals, after the Napoleonic Wars, you saw then British power radiate out of Calcutta all across, As the High Commissioner said, there was one point Singapore was part of India. You had the Bengal presidency and the Madras presidency were really deeply connected to trade and a whole range of networks all across the Asia, and I think they became the dominant actors in this part. Today, just as China challenged that system, today there is a new power rising, risen in the East, and it is the rise of China that's going to force, I think, a new order in this part of the world. And I think China's rise as a second largest economy, second largest military power, is going to have enormous consequences for this region, for India, for everyone in this part of the world. But I think there's an interesting parallel to the interwar period. If you see the interwar period, that is when Japan became a power, invaded, came almost into India, what was the configuration of forces? I mean, you had the British and the Americans, India and China had to join hands to defeat the Japanese power. That is, but today's we don't think of in those terms, but the Indian Army, British Indian Army, collaborated with the Chinese National Army, backed by American engineers who built the Stillwell Road, and the British, who were ousted from Singapore onwards, had to pull in every single resource in the world they had to restore the balance. So it took an enormous effort. But today, the actors are the same. I mean, but Japan is a key player in the Indo-Pacific. Australia is a key player in the Indo-Pacific. China is the dominant power. The British, of course, if you remove the British and put Americans there, it's the same cast of characters, but aligned in different ways, but actually looking to connect to see how the geopolitics of the Bay of Bengal will play out. Here again, Northeast and Bay of Bengal, I would say, are deeply connected. As we said, look, the rise of Japanese emergence as a maritime power, the need to come through Burma into the Northeast, the rise of now we're going to see the development of the island territories, India's own Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Australia's Cocos and Keeling, and the Christmas Island. So you're going to see actually the dynamic in the Northeast is going to be shaped by what happens in the maritime domain. And one of the great things that China has done, as it developed, Chinese themselves are landlocked. If you look at it, they had a big coast on the Western Pacific, but the rest of it is landlocked. So China's own effort has been, how does it connect its inland areas to the Indian Ocean? They've at least tried out 3 or 4 corridors. The China-Myanmar corridor, which is actually connecting Sichuan and China, Southwest China to the Bay of Bengal. In fact, if you go to Kunming, there are big focus on studies of Bay of Bengal, of Indian Ocean, what's happening there. A second corridor is the China-Nepal corridor. That is, you get to the markets of the great Himalayan plains to be able to come down to do business and eventually get to Calcutta, which becomes your port of entry into the Bay of Bengal. A third corridor that China has developed is through Arabian Sea. The China-Pakistan corridor, of course, CPEC, that everyone is familiar with. And now they're talking about an Iran-China corridor where you can come into the Gulf in partnership. So what you're having is, I don't think we should think in terms of a separation between landlocked regions and maritime regions. Actually, the rise of China is forcing a kind of sort of twisting together the great Eurasian landmass and the Indian Ocean by sheer economic reasons. So if you think of India's Northeast, China, Southwest China, Northern Burma, upper highlands of Southeast Asia, these are all far from the sea. But in the new geopolitical churn, they're all going to be connected in a very, very deep way to the Indian Ocean. And I think we should see the integrative forces rather than separating them out. Because Northeast is landlocked, it has nothing to do with the maritime. It will have everything to do with the larger geopolitics. So the rise of China, I think, and China's entry is into the Indian Ocean, begins in Bay of Bengal. The Malacca Straits is central for the Chinese. So therefore, what the Chinese are doing is really to step up the presence. Of course, the first military base is in Djibouti, in the Red Sea area. But they're also, they see the entry point into the Indian Ocean east to the Bay of Bengal. After all, South China Sea and Bay of Bengal are next to each other. They're almost like antechambers in the central parts of the Indo-Pacific. So you're going to see a lot more activity of the Chinese. If you ask our Navy, they tell you the Chinese naval activity around the Andaman Sea, Andaman Islands is big. They're building ports, they're building infrastructure, for example, in Burma, at the Chakpu Island, where India is trying to develop Sitwe Airport. The Chinese are quite further down with what they do in the Chakpu Airport, Chakpu Port, and the pipelines that they built connecting Kunming region to the Arabian Sea. So I think you have a lot of activity going on in this part of the Bay of Bengal. Many of it will have huge consequences because China is not just another country. Today, second largest economy. It's the rapidity of China's military modernization and its ability to produce outcomes through military, technological, and other means has dramatically increased. So that's a new reality, and I think so it's not a question of whether we deal with China or not. We have to deal with the Chinese power. And we shouldn't be, a lot of Indians, sometimes we say, how are the Chinese coming into the Indian Ocean? I think if the Dutch, the Portuguese, the British, and the French can come, of course the Chinese will come. It's part of their structure as the world's largest trading nation. I think you can argue with the consequence of China's rise, but you can't say Chinese have a legitimate right, like any other great power, to be in this part of the world. The question is how we deal with it. Is the question not saying is it legitimate or is wrong? As they say, look, Indian Ocean is not India's ocean. Just as South China Sea is not China Sea. That the great powers, when they rise, they're going to come to different corners of the world. Given China's interest in the Middle East, its interest in Africa, you're going to see more and more Chinese presence in this part of the world. And that's going to be a reality we have to come to terms with. So before I come to the Indian response, what we need to do, just a word about the US. You have Trump too. I'm sure last year and a half we had nothing but Trump on our newspapers, and the whole debates everywhere is about what Trump is doing. So I think there are interesting ways Trump is both a discontinuity as well as a continuity there. I mean, I think there's so much focus on the discontinuity. For example, unlike the previous administrations, the Trump's approach to international trade has been fundamentally different. Unlike the previous administrations, which focused on alliances and partnership, Trump thinks alliances are really not, most of them are free riders. He doesn't have to spend so much time cultivating allies and friends. He thinks actually US can do it all on its own. If the previous Trump administration and the Biden administration talked about building coalitions in the Indo-Pacific, whether it's a Quad or AUKUS or you name it, to build regional coalitions to balance Chinese power. Trump seems to think he can do a direct deal with Xi Jinping, and I think you're going to see a lot in the next 2 weeks. Trump is going to go to Beijing on the 14th, 15th of this month. So you're going to see how that plays out. But the attitude of how Trump thinks about the world, thinks about Asia, seem to suggest a profound discontinuity. But does that mean the Indo-US relationship simply doesn't matter? Here I think it's actually, I don't think we should jump to that kind of conclusion. But if you look at actually India-US relations, while Trump's language, his diplomatic style have created a sense of anxiety and unease, but if you look at the actual numbers, the relationship is not doing too badly. You have actually, the trade is booming between India and the US. Notwithstanding the tariffs, we have actually for the first time an interim trade agreement between India and the US, which we couldn't do under Trump 1. A 10-year defense framework agreement has been recently signed. We're going to have a Quad ministerial meeting that again I think will take place in the middle of this month, when you have Secretary Rubio is going to be here along with the Japanese and the Australian counterparts. So things are not as bad as they look, but the optics of the relationship, clearly Trump's style has created some impact. My own sense is that I don't think we don't have a vote in the US election. So it's not for us to say Trump is a good guy or a bad guy. You deal with it. If he's the number one power as a crazy guy, you have no choice but to deal with it. Right? So it's not something saying, dismissing him or no, he's a reality for the next 2.5 years. And who knows what happens after that. So, as we said, there's an Arab friend who was the other day saying, look, even if a monkey sits in the White House, we have to deal with the monkey. It's the power of the US system, the US capacities. Today you see that 10,000 miles away, what the US is doing in the Persian Gulf. Single-handedly, no allies, no partners, is doing it all alone. So its capacity to deliver military power, to change global economic equations is a reality. So therefore the question for us is, how do we deal with that reality? Rather than saying it's not good guy or bad guy, it shouldn't really matter to us, because that's an American citizen's right. If they think this guy's crazy, they'll throw the rascals out, as they say. But for us, as long as he's in power, we have to deal with that reality. And I think by the time Trump leaves, the global trading system would have changed. The global military structure would have changed. The multilateral system would have changed. So I think that is the real thing. There I would think, as India's own power increases, we are in a good position. But the question is, how do we navigate that world rather than run away from it, or hoping like hell the previous world will come back. It's not going to come. So I would say, just conclude the thing in terms of India's challenges. One, we got to keep dealing with the changes in the great power relations. The US-China relationship, the US-Russia relationship will keep changing. If you look at last 100 years, there was a time when America and Russia were friends against Germany. They were enemies many times. They're partners in the détente period. So it's never been a single unchanging relationship. If you look at US-China relationship, as I said, US and China collaborated in the Second World War. So they too have had a history of ups and downs. So that is the reality. So there will always be changes. The question is, are we in a better position to deal with it? My sense is, if our national capabilities grow, we will be in a better position to deal with the shifts that takes place between US, China, and Russia. The second, I think, is on the economic side, that the global trading system is changing. Therefore, how do we reform ourselves internally? How do we produce economic reform at home that can take care of India's economic interests globally? And I think that is the big challenge. The answer is not simply saying, if the WTO is not going to come back, the question for us is, how do we reform our own economy to be able to deal with a changing world? On security, I think when Trump is talking about allies matter less, that doesn't mean we simply say that, look, Quad is not going to work. Quad is going to work to some extent. We're going to have India and Australia, India and Japan. We have to do more with ourselves. Because look, Americans will come and go. Like just the Britain left in 1968. It is what we do within the region. Because India is going to be here. Australia is going to be here. We have the shared waters of the Eastern Indian Ocean. Japan is going to be here. Indonesia is going to be here. So we have to find ways, irrespective of what the Americans do. If Americans are there, helping is good. But if they don't want to be there, that doesn't mean we give up, throw up our hands and say, start mourning. What we need to do is, we need to do more with each other. That is what India, Australia must do more with each other. India, Japan must do more with each other. Trilaterally, bilaterally, triangular, whichever fashion we can. We need to take charge of our own region. And I think this is the meaning of burden sharing that Trump talks about. When Trump says, guys, you got to do more for yourself, I think for us there's an opportunity actually to say, we do more for ourselves. We strengthen ourselves. We create conditions for peace and prosperity in the region on our own steam. And that will actually make us easier to deal with the shifting dynamics of US relationship with China and Russia. So I think the future in that sense is in our hands. It is what we do within ourselves. That I think therefore the focus must be on how we strengthen ourselves internally. How do we work closer with our neighbors, with Bangladesh, for example. I can't imagine a scenario where India can be a major actor in a look east policy without strong, positive, productive relationship with Bangladesh. I'm a hopeful guy. I mean, I could be wrong, but we have the same government for the first time in Delhi and Calcutta after 50 years. Not since 1977, there's been a same government in Delhi and Calcutta. There's a historic shift. We have the same governments in Delhi, Calcutta, and Guwahati, if you will. So I think this is actually an opportunity, I think. And we also have new rulers in Dhaka. We have new rulers in Kathmandu to take a fresh look at this region. That is today, how do we work together within the country, I'm talking about first, and then work with the others to see, look, how do we transform this region on the basis new initiatives, on the basis of common sense, on the basis of pragmatism. That means go back to first principles, to rework our region, seizing the opportunities that exist, because the change in the global trading system, the change in the global security order, to demand that we act in our own region. And I think the political change in Delhi, in Calcutta, and around us, I think gives us an opportunity to take a fresh look at regional cooperation, at sub-regional cooperation, to see, look, where do we go from here? And within that, I would think the Northeast will be quite central in terms of how we connect Northeast to itself first, to the mainland, and to the regions around it will play a very, very critical part. I think I'll stop here, and I'm sure the Asia Commissioner.
Green, please deliver your lecture.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, namaste, and Yumalundi. Yumalundi is the word in the language of the indigenous people from around our capital, Canberra, which means hello and welcome. And in greeting you in this way, I'm demonstrating the respect of our government to indigenous people in this country, in Australia, and all around the world. I'm very pleased to be back in Shillong. Although all parts of India are delightful to visit, there's something very special about the Northeast. I've had the pleasure of visiting Arunachal Pradesh and Assam in the past. I have flown in today from nearby Bhutan. Last month I was in Darjeeling, and later this month my wife and I will make our first visit to Sikkim. In all of this, and possibly in all of my visits around India, Meghalaya is special to me. I undertook a beautiful and very taxing trek in this state earlier this year to Nongblai and Kongtong, which remains amongst the handful of my most memorable experiences in India. So it's a pleasure to come to your state, but there is serious work to be done, as ASCON's presence here demonstrates. In less than a decade, ASCON has built a strong reputation as a leading platform for research and dialogue on India's northeast, focused on the intersection between that region, Southeast Asia, and the wider Indo-Pacific. Many thanks to you, Sabyasachi Datta, for your work in ensuring ASCON's great success, but also in bringing us together for this interesting discussion tonight. And I couldn't be more pleased to be doing it with two of my dearest friends, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia and Professor Raja Mohan, two people on this planet from whom I have learnt more than just about anyone else. Thank you very much for your friendship and for your wisdom. I'm also keen to identify our own new representative on this side of the country, the recently arrived Consul General Bernard Lynch, who is accompanying me on this trip. Please make him welcome. Before I get into Australia's interests in India's northeast and the Bay of Bengal, I want to set the scene on Australia and India's partnership. That relationship has never been more consequential for us, and it has never been in such good shape. It is clearly, as Rajiv said, at the highest point that our relationship has ever reached. It's worth recording too that amongst all of our big partnerships, there is none that has developed so quickly as our relationship with India has over the last 5 to 10 years. There's a lot of reasons why that's happened, but let me identify 3 key drivers. First, our increasing strategic alignment. There is convergence in our security interests and actions. We find ourselves in an Indo-Pacific that is full of challenge and risk. As two nations that prioritise the maintenance of a rule-based order and have the heft with our partners to help ensure that is maintained, our interests are converging as never before. We are doing more together with our militaries, our foreign services and our intelligence services, whether bilaterally or through the Quad. And the language that we use to describe each other has also changed. For Australia, India is identified in our national defence strategy as one of our few top-tier defence and security partners. Just to add one numeric to what that means in practice, we've tripled the number of military exercises that we do with each other over the last decade. Second, we enjoy very high levels of economic complementarity. India is the fastest growing large economy in the world, so there can hardly be any economic unit on the planet that isn't taking notice of India's growth. But for Australia, it's special, since the key products we produce, energy, minerals and metals, and high-quality education services, are amongst the inputs that India needs for the next phase of its economic growth. Add to that underlying complementarity the very significant effort that the Australian government has put into the economic relationship in recent years. We've invested more than $250 million in new funding over that period, opening a new consulate, funding trade delegations, events and publications to draw attention to the corridor between Australia and India. And then there is our first phase free trade agreement, ECTA, struck 4 years ago, India's first free trade agreement with an OECD country. Together, these dynamics are having a remarkable impact on our trade. Let me identify that in just one powerful statistic. India's exports to the world have grown by 40% over the last 5 years. That sounds good. But over that same 5-year period, India's exports to Australia have grown by 200%. Put simply, India is benefiting from trade with Australia 5 times faster than it is with the rest of the world. I could identify similar statistics about how Australia is benefiting, but for the sake of brevity, let's just conclude that economic complementarity and the effects of our governments are a major tailwind for our economies. And third, the living bridge that connects us has never been more important or more vibrant. There are now more than 1 million people of Indian origin in Australia. I'm very conscious that 1 million people might not seem like so many to an Indian audience, but to us, it's a lot. It's roughly 4% of our population, and it is our fastest growing community. The Indian community is making a big contribution to our multicultural society. Let me give you a sense of that from the data of the Australian census statistics. Our census results tell us that people of Indian origin are twice as likely to hold a master's or further degree than others in our community. They tell us that Indian Australians are 1.5 times more likely to open their own business. And they tell us that Indian Australians are 1.6 times more likely to engage in community activities than other Australians, cultural, philanthropic or sporting. And there is one final, ultra-compelling proof point of the Indian community's engagement with Australia. Of the top 3 surnames that occur amongst all those registered to play cricket in Australia, 2 of them will be very familiar to you, Singh and Patel. Let me now turn to the geostrategic picture. We live in a world that has become sharper and more contested. Superpower tension is a persistent feature of the landscape. The rules-based order is under unforeseen pressure. Strategic risks are compounding in every region of the world, with norms against the use of force weakening. And coercion is an increasing feature of the way we live. While all eyes are currently on the Middle East, these trends are powerfully felt in the Indo-Pacific. That's the region where the world's future is being shaped, and it's where Australia and India have the most on the line, and it's where we can have the most effect. As middle powers, or in India's case, as a leading global power, we have a responsibility to build the region we want. A region in balance, a region where no country dominates and no country is dominated, where all countries can make sovereign choices. As we face these challenges, Australia sees India as a natural partner in the Indo-Pacific. At a time when the rules and norms are being challenged, India has been a steadfast advocate for the rules-based international order, including UNCLOS and the freedom of navigation and overflight. We value India's leadership in the Indian Ocean region, including its frequent role as first responder in times of crisis. We appreciate India's efforts under its Act East policy to build connectivity, trade and maritime connections with Southeast Asia, a region where Australia is very heavily invested and further deepening our engagement. And we look forward to India working more in the Pacific, where we think it can make a strong contribution to the region's development priorities and on combating climate change. India and Australia have a lot of interests in common, but where they truly intersect most is where our geographies overlap, notably in the Northeast Indian Ocean. It's one of the key domains of the Indo-Pacific where major issues such as maritime security, connectivity, and strategic stability are at stake. The Indian Ocean is globally significant. Through it travels more than a third of the world's bulk cargo and around 2/3 of global oil shipments. But for Australia, it's of even greater significance. 45% of Australia's exports depart from our west coast. Think iron ore, natural gas, gold and precious minerals, as well as very significant agricultural produce. So the Indian Ocean matters to Australia. Indeed, in our recently released National Defence Strategy, we reaffirmed that the Northeast Indian Ocean is in our primary area of strategic interest. Any slowdown or disruption of maritime links, whether from piracy, conflict, or other forms of instability, would have very serious implications for us. As our Foreign Minister Penny Wong put it to her counterparts from Indian Ocean countries, we are bound not just by shared geography, but by the shared destiny of our interests. All this helps to explain why maritime security is at the centre of our strategic partnership with India, and a key part of Australia's broader engagement with South Asia and the Indian Ocean region. And it's for this reason that the Prime Ministers of Australia and India have tasked officials like me to produce a maritime security cooperation roadmap to further advance our bilateral maritime collaboration. That project is well underway, with a good chance that we'll be able to secure it in the course of this year. Beyond the bilateral, through the Quad, we are supporting maritime domain awareness in the region and working to build up our capacity to respond to regional challenges. Australia and India also share a strong belief in the importance of regional institutions. We're both founding members of IORA. We are working closely together with India as the current IORA chair. We are co-chairing the Maritime Safety and Security Working Group. While Australia's principal interests in its sub-region are in the maritime domain, the land domain and its connectivity are also of consequence to us. India's northeast has unmet connectivity with its near abroad, which, if potentiated, could give better access for India to Southeast Asia and to the wider Indo-Pacific economy. We perceive that improved connectivity, logistics, and industrial capacity in and through this region can boost growth, prosperity, and security. But we also perceive the complexities that are engaged in this endeavour, particularly while the conflict in Myanmar significantly impedes connectivity from here to wider Southeast Asia. Now, I need to be frank with you that Australia isn't in a position to make a big difference to these challenges. We have much to focus on in more proximate areas to us, like the Pacific and maritime Southeast Asia, though we note with admiration the significant investments that our partner Japan makes in development and connectivity here in the northeast. But we do seek to make our own special contribution. Since 2019, the Australian government has been funding the SARIC initiative. That stands for South Asian Regional Infrastructure Connectivity. The objective of SARIC is to increase regional infrastructure connectivity amongst the states of South Asia. We do this in the understanding that regional connectivity in South Asia lags potential, and that were its potential to be met, the dividends would be substantial. We only have to look at regions with high levels of infrastructure connectivity amongst the countries, and Southeast Asia comes obviously to mind, to see what the benefits can look like. May I say parenthetically, something about the Australian aid program of which SAREC forms a part. Figures from the OEC tell us that across the group, aid transfers fell by 23% globally last year. A large number of developed countries are cutting their development assistance budgets. Australia is not amongst them. In fact, Australia's aid budget grew last year as it grew every year that the Albanese government has been in office. Having just been in Bhutan, I can report to you of a landmark success of the SAREC program. Over many years, Australia has made small but important investments to prove up the prospects for a major dam and hydropower development in Bhutan. It's called the Dorjilung Hydropower Project. Australia has funded technical studies, environmental and social impact investigations to build confidence in the project. Those contributions have not been big, but they have been catalytic, giving confidence to the World Bank and others that this project was sound. Yesterday, I participated in the loan signing ceremony between the Royal Government of Bhutan and the World Bank, which formalised a range of support from the World Bank and the IFC to the tune of $815 million US. The project is essentially underway, and the result will be transformative. It will generate 1,125 megawatts of clean green power. It will, in one stroke, increase Bhutan's green power production by 40%. And the regional character of the project is very clear. With Tata Power being the government of Bhutan's major partner in the project, and 80% of the power produced slated for transmission to India. It is, in short, a powerful symbol of how regional connectivity and infrastructure can provide substantial mutual benefit between the states of the region. We are buoyed by the remarkable success of the Dorjilung project and are interested in replicating its success across other parts of South Asia. That would include in the connectivity between India's northeast and surrounding states, where practical, sustainable initiatives can be found and where the government of India also backs the proposal. So, how do we draw together an Australian perception of the northeast and the wider Indo-Pacific? First, we should acknowledge that we are facing a region and a world that brings more challenges than ever. The Indo-Pacific is the key geography for us, but within it, the Pacific and Southeast Asia are our primary fields of concern. There is much to occupy our policymakers in those fields, as well as the flare-ups further abroad, notably in Gaza and Iran, that demand our attention. But our bandwidth can and does extend to India's northeast and to the Bay of Bengal. Most notably, Australia's key interests are engaged in the Northeast Indian Ocean, and our increasingly valuable partnership with India is being framed as a major point of focus. The forthcoming Maritime Security Cooperation Roadmap will play a large role in charting the next phase of that effort. And beyond the maritime domain, our SAREC initiative provides us with a useful point of engagement with all of India's geographies that connect with its neighbourhood. Beyond these initiatives, I should of course mention the regular engagement that our Consul General in Kolkata is able to make in this region. With a new Consul General, one of our most experienced diplomats just returned from serving as Ambassador to Jordan, who has modestly more resources under his control, we can expect to see at least current levels of effort maintained. He will certainly have my support if he feels he is able to devote more effort to this consequential part of India. And the fact that India's northeast economic growth is so strong, I'm told that Meghalaya's growth was just shy of 10% per annum in the most recent statistics, provides some prospects for him and his Austrade team to delve into. So, in conclusion, without claiming to offer any particular ways in which Australia's attention might further engage this sub-region, allow me to offer just a few personal thoughts. First, it's worth recording that the Gulf crisis has made people across the region and the world think about different geographic alignments and possible different energy flows. It strikes me that India's east and northeast will need more energy if the sub-region's growth prospects are to be fulfilled. That will include natural gas, a commodity that Australia exports the third largest volume of globally. Traditionally, India has sought LNG from the Gulf, while Australia has focused on Northeast Asian markets. That has served us both well. But a quick look at the map shows that Australia's major LNG fields are in the northwest of our continent, adjacent across the Indian Ocean from India's east. Might it suit India in the future to secure supplies of gas whose transit doesn't involve major geostrategic choke points? And if India was to look at making greener steel with its huge stocks of iron ore in its east, might it use Australian gas rather than coal to achieve that? Second, in a very different field, Australia is putting an indigenous lens on its diplomacy. We have been doing more with India's tribal groups, including connecting with Australia's First Nations. This has mostly been in the space of art, fashion and business, and included bringing Australia's premier Songlines exhibition to Delhi this year. Given the large number of Indians of tribal background in the northeast, can we see a basis for a greater exchange in this field? For example, would it be appropriate for an Australian First Nations artist to perform at the Hornbill Festival in future? Third, Australian institutions are responding very actively to Prime Minister Modi's call for foreign universities to open branch campuses in India. In fact, the first 2 campuses set up by foreign universities from anywhere in the world came from Australia. And another 5 Australian universities have sought and received University Grants Commission approval to open campuses from Chennai to Gurugram. The appetite amongst Australian universities for engagement with India, be that a campus or articulated degrees or joint programs, is far from slaked. Might this city of Shillong, well known for its admirable history in education, be a venue for more Australian university interaction in the future? Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure for me, our Consul General and our teams to join you this evening in Shillong. And I look forward to the interaction which is to follow. Your sub-region engages our interests as we pursue a wider journey between India and Australia. And I trust that we have been able to give you some points of reflection and perhaps inspire some thoughts from you on how Australia might engage even more with India's northeast and the Bay of Bengal. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that extremely illuminating and inspiring speech. I think we have, a very, and you've given us a lot of ideas and posed some very important questions on what we can think about here. So I'll not, I think I will go straight to the interaction. Anybody would like to go first, or otherwise I will. Maybe would you like to go first, Kong Patricia? Okay. So you, I think we'll start with the last point that you said about educational collaboration. We have a lot of educational institutions represented here in this room. Maybe somebody on that theme, if would like to ask something or something to share.
Good evening. I wouldn't do I have the permission to speak something on security issues first. I would rather address the ambassador. Excellency, could you just explain the logic of you being a part of AUKUS while you were already a part of Quad? Is there a potential thing of you working at cross purposes by being on both sides?
Well, I don't think there is. they both work in different ways to strengthen our security and the security of the Indo-Pacific. They're quite different. I know, and many people speak of them in one breath, but they're very different activities. AUKUS is a defence activity. It's about defence capability. It's got two pillars. The first pillar is about nuclear-powered submarines. The second pillar is about a whole range of new and horizon weapon systems. The first pillar is closed. It exists only for the three partners. The second pillar is open. And you will have seen that there have been the first steps towards others joining us in that question of more complex defence capability. Quad is quite different. Quad is not a treaty. It's a regional grouping. It's deliberately designed to work in complementarity with ASEAN, which is the core infrastructure in our region, the core architecture in our region. It is very deliberately not a defence activity. It's a strategic activity. We're engaged in issues like maritime security, building infrastructure, supporting countries when they suffer natural disasters, and on economic security. So they both help with our security and the security of our region, but they're quite different and they work in very complementary ways.
Questions?
This is to you, Professor Rajamohan. We have talked about China's rise in the Indo-Pacific, Bay of Bengal. We also touched upon what's going on in Myanmar. Now, it's quite evident from what's going on there that it's a very fragmented country. China's Belt and Road initiatives are doing quite well. They are developing ports, and they're probably looking at, they're also strengthening their position with Bangladesh. Now, if we, as a group of nation or regional nation, are only the mute spectators to this whole thing and not doing anything about it, because China is very comfortable with this position. The fragmented country, the groups serve their interest. They play on both sides there, and things are only going to work in their favor. If we talk about the regional geopolitics, do you think there is a case for a group of countries who would be concerned about how the democracy can be brought back there in a very phased, sustained manner, and some sort of support can be done? Because right now we are not seeing any evidence of any global players or regional players engaged in this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think what's happening in Burma is going to have really long-term consequence to not just for itself, but also to its neighbors. I mean, especially Thailand, India, China, in a big way. China and Burma has always had a historically a special relationship. That's reality, given the size of the length of the border. And going right back to the independence of Burma, where the Chinese had their Kuomintang forces take shelter in Burma, so therefore there has been managing that border has been a primary concern. But today, a risen China has the economic tools, has the political influence, the spread of its through just its telecom signal, people tell me, its Belt and Road initiative, its pipelines, it exercises enormous influence. Second, political level, they become the mediators between different groups within Burma. The conflict between the insurgent groups and the state. So in a way, the rise of Beijing's influence in Burma reflects the rise of China itself. Now, what are the others doing? I mean, ASEAN, for example, has been focused on a whole range of issues, but Burma has not been very receptive. So you have actually ASEAN has had as a member to deal with the problem. They've had a serious problem. ASEAN has also turned to Russia. It's not as if they're going to simply surrender the sovereignty to the Chinese. So they're looking for cards, somebody who can give them more arms. Russia has actually been a player in Burma. For a short while, the US was engaged. If you go back to the first year of the, early years of the last years of the Obama administration. So the Americans wanted to open up and engage, but then once the coup took place in 2021, that relationship has gone down. For India, I think it's one of the most important relationship, and I think we have a large land border. It's almost most of it in the northeast, 2,000 kilometers or so. We have a maritime border. Actually, people don't think of it. All the way down to Chennai, you have actually a maritime border which stretches with them. We have the islands, of course. So I think it doesn't get the kind of attention it should in a fundamental way. But my own sense is our ability in terms of contributing financially, technologically, has been constrained. We've done some defense deals, we give them some submarines, but the scale of what we do pales in comparison to the Chinese. So that's where I think we'll have to work with other partners to see what we can do. There's things we can do on our own in the border areas, whether we can, in fact, the demand is there. I mean, they want us to do more. Bring your money, bring your expertise, do more things, but we're not able to deliver. But hopefully now, I think as Delhi begins to focus on this region a lot more, I think we need to do quite a bit. But we need to work with our partners, both in ASEAN as well as in
different perspective. Myanmar is very important for Northeast, so I'm very happy you have raised this question. Just 2 or 3 points, very practical points. First of all, whose responsibility exactly is it to bring democracy in Myanmar? Of the UN, of EU, of ASEAN, of India? None of the above. The responsibility is totally laid on the shoulders of the people of Myanmar. Because in this day and age, you cannot export democracy into a country if that country does not want democracy. So I think first of all we should stop feeling guilty that here is neighbor suffering so much and we are not able to do anything. Democracy will come very, very gradually in that country. This is my experience. There is a central theology with the Tatmadaw, the military, that at best they are willing to have limited democracy in that country. And they worked very well for the past 10 years, from 2011 to 2021. And then at that time, the leaders of democracy obviously misjudged the situation. And as a result, 5 years later, the country has suffered so much and it has actually gone back to the past. So first point is we need not feel guilty. This is really not something that we have done or not done, and as a result, Myanmar is suffering. The second point basically is that the neighbors indeed, as Raja says, has a very strong interest in stability, in unity, in progress of that country. India follows a very clear logical policy. First, whichever government is in Naypyidaw, in the capital, we will deal with it. We have dealt with them throughout, with Nevin, with General Than Shwe, and now we are dealing with General Min Aung Hlaing without any discomfort. But at the same time, because as you rightly said, the country is fragmented, we also deal with the other side as well. In our players on the resistance and opposition side, and that is about the most prudent policy that India can follow. However, if in Northeast scholars, players, intellectuals have any better idea, please feel free to share, and I can offer to take it to the authorities in Delhi. Thank you.
May I make a quick complimentary point to Ambassador Bhatia? Part of my speech was to talk about how we live in a world which is more contested. That has implications for conflict zones in the world. You know, we have lived through over the last generation a period of unusual global harmony, where it's been possible for the big players to work together to resolve regional issues. And Australia played a role, for instance, in bringing to an end cycle of violence in Cambodia, which was only possible really because the big players wanted that to happen. You are dead right to want a better future for Myanmar, and in addition to all of the strategic points that have been made, there's a serious humanitarian point to be made here. The people of Myanmar deserve a better future, not a future characterized by economic decline and violence. But that is frankly harder in this season of global affairs.
Yeah. I think we can take a few questions all together. Please, go ahead.
No, I just want to come back to Manipur and why India is undermining what's happening in that part of the periphery. Because I think what is happening in Myanmar is being carried over to this side of the border. And we don't seem to realize the consequences, especially after the arrest of all those, those people recently. We can be sure that somebody is adding to the conflagration. It's not just an internal issue anymore. So why are we not even talking about that?
I think we'll take a few more questions, and if you have it directed to a particular person, please.
Okay.
First, and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
No, first of all, I must compliment both Professor Raja Mohan and High Commissioner Philip Green. Sitting here, I feel as if I'm looking at the Google map, and while opening it, the dot that is there, the blue dot that we are here, is connected to the rest of the world, especially the geopolitics of the world. And both of you have articulated very well. Now, coming to my question is, sometime in February, there was an event here, organized by ASCON only, in, I think, collaboration with MEA in Delhi, where practically from Japan, all stakeholders were there. The government, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs was there, and the industry, the think tank, the academia were there. And one thing which struck me about what they said was the need for building a regional alliance here. And particularly in the context of what you are talking about, where the Quad stands today. Okay? Now, especially with the changes taking place in Bangladesh and changes taking place in Nepal. Now, my question is, what should India, as the leading country here, should be doing? Some initiative should be there to make this regional alliance. Ambassador Bhatia, he said something about BIMSTEC. A lot of things are happening. But at least to remove some of the anxieties and unease within the region. Because that has a direct impact on Northeast in all respect. So this is my question.
Thank you. I think there was somebody here, and then we can come back to the... Yeah, first, yeah, please at the back, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, here.
Yeah, Golan, but let him come first, and I'll get back to you, yeah.
Thank you. Very warm good evening. I just wanted to ask about the geopolitical scenario and also relate it with the situation in Bangladesh. Like the current NDA government has the emphasis of neighborhood first policy, and today's evening we also stressed upon how important are for neighbors in the rising, current situation, how US is operating. Now, I would like to focus on the TISTA and how the West Bengal government, there's a change in the government.
Can you keep your questions focused and short, please?
Sure.
In the interest of time.
So my question is regarding how the current government in the West Bengal would bring in change in the TISTA deal with Bangladesh, and how it will impact the current geopolitical scenario with China in mind.
Okay. Golan, one more, then we can come back.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Golan Naulak, High Commissioner Green, which is, in your speech you mentioned about the opportunities for opportunities where Australia can contribute or support northeastern states or northeast region in liquefied natural gas, indigenous linkages, and foreign university campuses opening up. we are a region where there's a strong English-speaking youth. Do you think, what would be the opportunities for Northeast youth in any way to, learn from Australia or benefit from technological know-how of Australia? We know that in Australia there's a lot of focus on vocational trade, and is there something that we can explore for collaboration partnership? My second question is to both Professor Raja Mohan and Ambassador Bhatia. When we talk about China, we cannot miss out on Myanmar, and we know that in the last 5-6 years, we know what China has been doing in Myanmar. Most recently, we know how they have handled. We're aware how they've handled the ethnic armed organizations in the north. India is keenly aware, but in terms of foreign policy formulation and execution, why is it that we are always very slow? We talk in this kind of meetings every time what needs to be done, but there's always a disconnect between what needs to be done and we're always a few years late. Is there something inherently slow about Indian foreign policy? Thank you.
Okay, I think
excuse me, sir. I have a question as well.
let me come back to you in the next round. Yeah.
So let me come to the gentleman at the front. You talked around the question of the way in which we all respond to the complex geostrategic scene that we find ourselves in. You talked about the Quad and you talked about alliances. So everybody tells me that alliances are not in India's DNA, and so I take that as a given. I contrast it, however, with the way in which Australia thinks about engaging in the world. Maybe because we're smaller, maybe because we live in a more isolated part of the world, but the way in which we think about dealing with problems is, first of all, who can partner with us and can make a difference. So a sort of underlying theme of my mission here is to engage India in a way that is consistent with its norms and interests and its values, is humble and respectful to its traditions, but which asks the question, how deep a partnership do we want to find? The second part of your question referred to the need for greater regional engagement, perhaps led by India as the sub-regional hegemon. And I just want to say that one of the things that is very evident to me watching Indian statecraft in the 2.5 years that I've been here is how deft India's engagement with its region has been when opportunities open up. There was an election in the Maldives where a party won on the platform of India out. And in a very short period of time, your diplomats and leaders had crafted a new partnership with the Maldives, which I think puts India and the Maldives both in good stead. I've seen the way in which, and I referred to it in my speech, the way in which India responded very powerfully to Sri Lanka's economic crisis and then to its tragic cyclone. So, I think there's a new norm being formed here about the way in which India deals with its near abroad. A question for me, as an observer, is how far that new norm prevails in other parts of India's near abroad. And I think we can all imagine what might be achievable if that new norm was deployable in other parts of India's geography. So thanks so much for your question about Meghalaya and what might be able to be done. Look, I'm a visitor to this place and I don't claim deep knowledge, but what is obvious to an outsider about this place is its natural beauty and the clean, green environment. By Indian standards, a very small population, a lush landscape. So Australia's done quite well by finding niche fields of agriculture to go further up the supply chain and create processed products that retain a clean and green feel. People around the world are looking now for provenance. Where does it come from? Was it organic? Who was involved in making this? How did that change a family or a community's lifestyle? And that can bring big rewards quite quickly. So that's the one small thought that I have. I'm going to leave Manipur to my friends.
I appreciate what is on the front lobe of many of you, Manipur and perhaps Mizoram as well, and then the three neighbors, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Nepal. This has been mentioned. So Manipur is a case apart. I think this is very much both an internal problem and it has an external dimension. To the extent it has an external dimension, and Mizoram too, I think the government is doing its best to make sure that the impact on the people is limited to the extent possible. But we have to remember that when there is fire in the neighbor's house, some heat and some damage will come to our home as well. We don't go to the extent of trying to resolve their problems because it is beyond us. We have enough of our own hassles to think of mediating in Myanmar. We cannot do that. We only can do a kind of a protectiveness which is being done. And yes, you are right, when these incidents happen, people are caught taking drones and other things onto the other side. Obviously, firm action is taken. It is being done. On the neighbors, I think we have to be clear, and I think Raja would agree, given the nature of the situation, the asymmetry of size, the asymmetry of power, the history, the geography, India's relations with its neighbors will perhaps be never of one kind. They will always fluctuate. Sometimes they will be good, sometimes they may not be so good. So at this stage, clearly I think everybody agrees that Bangladesh is a very important neighbor. Raja said that again today. And I think there should be and there will be a serious and sincere effort by both countries, by both sides, to have a stable, cordial relationship between Delhi and Dhaka. And in fact, it is my submission that the election results in Bengal and in Assam, if good sense prevails, will bring positive results. There are some worries there as well as here, but I think if pragmatism prevails, we can see good relations ahead. With regard to Nepal, I think we seem to be beginning well, and then this Lipulek thing has happened. But I think the view from the South Bloc is that they are getting ready for a series of bilateral discussions between Delhi and Kathmandu. And the aim is to obviously arrange the visit of the new young Prime Minister of Nepal to India, as well as separately the Prime Minister of Bangladesh as well. So I think by the year end, in the next 4, 5, 6 months, I see stability and cordiality emerging in these two relationships. About Myanmar, I'm not sure, because the situation there is really fraught. And while the new leadership is talking about dialogue, whether there are takers for the dialogue given all the bloodshed in the past 5 years, that still remains to be seen. So we will have to wait and watch as far as Myanmar is concerned. Thank you.
What you said. See, in general, I think we've had a problem. See, in India's northeast, northern Burma, Yunnan province, the overlapping of ethnicities across lines that were drawn, both initially, what happened in the Anglo-Assamese wars or the Anglo-Burmese wars, you had a complex story of how state formation took place in this large set of regions which were not part of any initial empire. You have the rest of the world begins to creep in, and the challenges of state building have been quite serious for everyone. I mean, even say Thailand, which is their upper reaches, they still have challenges. Many parts where how you deal with indigenous populations is a problem. So some of it is built in, I think, in structural. To the extent that we can manage this through trans-border cooperation to limit the spillover effects, like, even in a developed place, Tamil Nadu, Sri Lanka, right? I mean, whatever you do, you can't escape it. I mean, in your case, in the Northeast as well, there are many places where this cross-border ethnicity and linkages produce problems. So while part of the diplomatic effort is to you create conditions for lessening or preventing the spillover, in the end, I think I would emphasize more what we do at home. That you have to build the capabilities, accelerated economic growth, because a lot of the conflicts are also economic, right? I mean, on land, water, property rights. So managing those, I think requires actually reform, readjustment internally. So I would say as a general rule, doing more at home is the answer to a lot of problems we face externally. And I think that's what in the longer term would really help us. In terms of initiatives, one of you talked about, I mean, I would say what we do with Bangladesh, I think we have an opportunity with Bangladesh and Nepal. So what we can do, whether through reviving the BBI or through the three of us, getting these relationships going forward, getting Northeast more access to the sea. I think if you look at actually, you can be optimistic if you look at 2008 to 2024. Almost, you had a dramatic transformation of India-Bangladesh relationship. Problems that had inherited from partition time, worsened after 65-71 wars, was sorted out. I mean, boundary dispute, land boundary dispute, enclaves, maritime boundary, terrorism, restoration of connectivity. So we've done enormous amount of things. But then you saw how quickly passions can bring it down. What happened in August 2024, and then things went down. But my chance, there is a hope, I think, at this point to restore the positive trajectory. If we can do better things with Bangladesh, let more trilateral cooperation emerge between India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan, I think it would go a long way. And then how do we bring in Burma into this becomes, because all the BIMSTEC, you're stuck on the problem between Bangladesh and Myanmar. So I would say get our own act together layer by layer. First layer would be Bangladesh, second layer would be trilateral, and then see what we can do with Burma. And I think the breakdown of state capacity or state structure in northern Burma will have dramatic consequences. Once you create an empty space where there's no governing authority, I think things could get a lot worse.
Thank you. I think can we have one last round of questions, because many hands, but I'll go first. Yeah, the lady who wanted to ask before, and then one by one. Please keep it brief, and kindly, if you have any particular person you want to address it to.
Thank you, sir. My question goes to Mr. Sir Philip. So, sir, how can Australia and India collaboration in education and skill development empower youth in the Northeast states to participate in this India Ocean Focus initiative like sustainable fisheries? Thank you, sir.
Okay.
So much to the panel. So first of all, my question is to Professor Raja Mohan. I think we have crossed paths quite a few times during my time at VIF. I'm here in Meghalaya now, Ambassador Bhatia as well. So, recent reports by the CSIS think tank in Washington, D.C. Has found that, the Iran war, the current war, has led to 50 to 80% depletion in the stockpile of critical munitions, Patriot missiles. Critical munitions, especially high-end ballistic, high-end missiles. So now I'm wondering if this trend continues, would that have implications for Indo-Pacific in terms of deterring China, for example, given that it will affect the readiness of American preparedness? And that's what worries many military generals at the moment. And lastly, to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Australia, you mentioned about development aid, and it's heartening to know that Australia's aid has actually increased. Japan has been a traditional provider of aid to India, and Meghalaya has been a major recipient of that aid. It has fallen last year. Germany, another big player, its aid budget, proposed budget for this year, again, aid has fallen for the first time in many years. And Meghalaya is a recipient of that aid, or German aid as well. So given this, it's great to know that Australia is increasing its budget actually, and all of this has to do with more or less the rearming in those nations as a result of the security situations they both face. So what is the best way for Northeast India to leverage the increased Australian development aid, for example? So if you have any thoughts, it would be good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
My question is directed to Professor Raja Mohan. Sir, it's regarding the poignant remark that you made regarding China connectivity. You have kind of mentioned that when it comes to China Western region, it's landlocked, but it did not stop China to build connectivity. It is in this regard that you have given certain kind of prospects to Northeast in region as well, where majority of the states we are landlocked. So, but I observe that when you talk about the northeastern states, you say that it's very crucial. The very fact that the political elites are changing in Nepal and Bangladesh, right? It will be a key factor. But sir, as you have recently just briefly remarked also, that when it comes to a successful foreign policy, it relies on a strong domestic foundations, domestic capabilities. So in this regard, I see that somewhere you not mention about the strategic importance of the inland waterways that we have. The region we are landlocked, but there are dry ports here, there are land ports here as well, and two of the national waterways, the Barak and the Brahmaputra is here. In this regard, do you think that this connectivity infrastructure that we have can be improved upon and perhaps help the region? Thank you.
Okay. Vinayak? Yeah.
I think I'm audible. Sir, my question is to His Excellency High Commissioner Green. Whether we have agreement on political issues or not, there are two things that invariably strike us. One is the question of climate change, and the other is the question of global warming. And I think, can we know what more is Australia-India partnership going to do about this kind of a core issue that's going to hit us whether we have agreement on political issues or not? And the second part sequel to that is, has it been possible to identify educational institutions that could actually have focused studies on this question of climate change and global warming?
Okay.
Hello, sir. My question is to Sir Raja Mohan. How do you see Chinese presence in Myanmar affecting India's Bay of Bengal strategy?
Okay. Last one.
Sir, may I? My question is very short, sir. A very good evening to all of you, sir. My question is to Sir, His Excellency, Mr. Philip Green. Sir, what is the future of Quad? There are concerns that under Trump, the USA is not giving it much importance. And even the leaders level meeting last year didn't happen. So, in this situation, do you think India, Japan and Australia might work more closely on their own? Or will the Quad still remain important in the Indo-Pacific as you are the part of Quad? Thank you.
One last question, sir.
No, I think let me, just 1 second. Here. Yeah.
Thank you. So my question is directed at Ambassador Bhatia. Lately, India and China have found themselves in familiar waters regarding our energy security. So do you, in your opinion, what are the mechanisms that India and China could engage with to overcome our energy security concerns?
Okay, I think because we're getting late, so I'll cut it here. Sorry, Bhakto. I think unless it's something really very very short, yeah.
Sir, I have a question related to India's internal security.
No, sorry.
Okay, so my question is for the High Commissioner, because you talked about in terms of dam building, talks of in terms of green energy for your iron ore processing in India. But the problem is that most of these things that you want to do, the dams, and then also the iron ore, are indigenous territories, where there are a lot of contestations happening in terms of, for example, the protest against this. So how does Australia, when it comes to these sectors, make sure that don't infringe into indigenous rights? Because that's going to be very important, because it talks a lot about indigenous rights in your own country as well.
The Stillwell Road be reopened?
Okay.
Should we look to that?
Should the Stillwell Road be reopened? Okay. I think we come back to the panel. Excellency, I think maybe you take the first.
Okay, I think I've got about 5. Let me try to do my best. I'll start at the finish on the gentleman who asked about indigenous rights. Enormously important to my country. And I guess it's true that following important protocols for land rights and the interests of indigenous people can slow down projects in our country. But we think for our national development to be sustainable, we need to work with our indigenous people as key partners, especially given our history and their landmark role in our country. We can bring a bit of that to your region, and by the way, one of the studies that was funded by the Australian government that supported the Doyle project was precisely about the interests of the local communities who would be affected by this dam. And in the end, the only real principle you can apply is a high level of fairness in dealing with people whose lives will be impacted, or indeed to choose not to do a project because the costs are too high. Gentleman asked about climate change, and thank you very much. Gosh, it would have been terrible to go for this whole nearly 2-hour session and not mention the most compelling long-term challenge that all of us face, and how easy it is for us to get mired in all of the other things that are consequential but a bit more present, and not deal with that. So, 2 things. Australia is the chair of the negotiations for the Committee of the Parties this year. In doing that, we will be working with Turkey, which will actually be hosting the Committee of the Parties. We will be hosting a major pre-COP, or rather, we'll be supporting the hosting of major pre-COP in the South Pacific, in Fiji, with a side visit to one of the atolls that is most endangered by the climate change catastrophe. That's a contribution that we're making, and we're putting right at the centre of that the interest of small states and the way in which they are asymmetrically impacted by climate change. In relation to whether Australian universities can do anything about that, you'll find a conga line of Australian universities who are interested. Climate change studies is a major field of Australian study. I have to say, I don't see it cropping very much up in the curricula of Australian universities operating here. I can only imagine that that's a question of supply and demand. But let me go away and ask my university colleagues whether they are planning courses on climate change. The student at the back asked about youth and skills and potentially fisheries and trades, and this is a really complex problem for me. So it is relatively easy to find a connection point between an Australian university teaching a tertiary degree at the university level and an Indian parent who's prepared to pay either for a student to go to Australia or to have that same level of study here in India at a much lower price point. It is devilishly difficult to find a business model that can bring the Australian technical and further educations, or what we call the dual institutions, those that are universities, but also teach high-quality trades, it is devilishly difficult to find a business model that allows those things, that same process to work. So what are we doing about it? We're trying to find tripartite models where Indian industry, who have a certain demand for a certain sort of vocational skill, together with a family, would pay for the cost of a course which might be able to be delivered by an Australian institution. Regrettably, one of the, well, not regrettable, it's, India's a wonderful country, but one thing that is different about my country is that people who are in the trades get paid a lot of money, and the result is that courses that educate people to be tradespeople find big price points. The gentleman who asked about drops in Japanese and German aid and Australian aid, I'm going to be candid with you, sir. There are questions of scale here that we could not possibly meet the need. But, you know, I very deliberately came here tonight with a story about how our relatively modest support on regional connectivity can have catalytic impact and cause big projects to happen. And in part, I came here to have all of you think about how that might have been put to the benefit of India and perhaps the Northeast. And finally, on the Quad, I've got a really good story to tell here. You know, the stories about the Quad losing momentum are quite wrong. You know, we had two excellent meetings of our foreign ministers last year. There may well be, well, there will be another pattern of meetings this year, I can assure you. The relations between Penny Wong, Dr. Jaishankar, Marco Rubio are really excellent. We have refined down what the Quad is trying to do in a way that will make it more effective. I know Raja's a big believer in the other three partners of the Quad doing more, and I'm not against that, and there is a trilateral partnership which can play some part, but I think the reality is that finding the sort of strategic balance that we want in our region is only possible with a forward-leaning United States.
Nobody was prepared for this kind of intensity of conflict. And I think that is really, you know, US otherwise spends $1 trillion, they want to spend $1.5 trillion now. Prepared for the kind of consumption of high-cost weapons, so that's one part. Even, I think Iran surprised the world that they produced thousands of missiles of different ranges, which has actually created a whole situation where the missile defenses are not really, you know, fully geared up to deal with that kind of threat. So I think in the US, the answer has been pretty simple. Go back to the private sector and say, look, you got to do more. You know, like in the Second World War, drawing the industry, converting some of it for defense production, those are the ideas that are being talked about. In our case, I think it's really public sector driven production of weapons. Some minor participation of private sector has been allowed. If we don't unleash full potential of our own private sector to participate in the defense production, we're going to face, I think, both in terms of what the Chinese are doing, eventually what the Pakistanis will do, the challenges are going to be quite dramatic. So I think taking defense production and an asymmetric strategy quite seriously becomes very, very important. On inland water transport, yes, I think the present NDA government has done some as relationship with Bangladesh improved across the eastern subcontinent. You began to do a lot more things, but my sense is there's been some loss of trust. I would say renewing that with the new leadership in both the places, hopefully we can do a lot more. I think on the China's role in Burma, it's going to keep growing. I mean, there's no escaping from that. So the question is, how do we invest in that relationship more? How do we, maybe Ambassador Bhatia can say a few words of our response. Finally, I would say on Stillwell Road, see, look, it's not economically the most dramatic one. Even with China, for example, we opened up the Sikkim road, for example, didn't really produce much outcomes because overall political trust, there's been problems. But I would say maybe so project Sabya can take up, what would be the conditions under which Stillwell Road can be revived? What are the kind of benefits you can get? What are the, so in a sense, without getting into recommending a policy action, we can suggest what are the difficulties, what are the possibilities, I would say at least thinking about it. Because I'm saying this because India-China relationship will improve, will see, we saw recently liberalization on direct investments, visas, some things will happen. Now within that, whether we can have more connectivity on the ground, what kind, because there's a lot of security related issues, but I think putting them down, a lot of times we leave it to the governments. Maybe if you say foreign policy is too important to be left to the governments, but at least nobody's stopping us from putting ideas, right? So you say, look, this is my assessed, concrete consideration with my limited expertise, with available information. You can produce things and thereby generate a debate and see where it takes us.
Through a question at me on India and China and energy security in the context of the Gulf War, I think he assumes that ambassadors are supposed to answer everything that they don't know. But I'll suggest to Sabya, I can see that there's a lot of interest in the China angle. And so I think we should get out of a sense of hesitation and organize an exclusive event on India-China relations, bringing some real experts from Delhi. I just wanted to go back to my dear friend Rudy's question about BIMSTEC. I think all of you know that Bangladesh new government is pushing for SAARC to be revived. And this is frankly, as far as I know, is a real no-no in Delhi. We are now quite fully invested in BIMSTEC. So I think Delhi will have to find a way to persuade Dhaka to stop flirting with SAARC and come back to the steady partner BIMSTEC, which is secretariat located in Dhaka. So Bangladesh seems to have forgotten that. I think eventually it is BIMSTEC which is going to be the instrument. But I think at the end of the day, what is very important is that we are really so grateful that here is an audience which is so deeply invested in all these issues, geopolitics, foreign policy, diplomacy, Northeast, and in particular the neighbors. And I think it is ESCON's responsibility, in my view, to make sure that this appetite is addressed suitably as you have done today. But I think there should be more occasions to really cultivate this deep interest that the audience has shown today. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to add a small bit on SAARC and BIMSTEC. Look, I think regional organizations can't substitute for national action. That is, if you have bad national policies, it doesn't matter what organization you create. It's not going to work. In the case of SAARC, there's a specific problem of Pakistan. It's not interested in regional integration. I mean, that's a sovereign right, so we should not attribute to that. But my own sense is India needs to do more on its own, of unilateralism, reforming its policies, how it deals with the borders, more trade facilitation on the borders, more connectivity. These are things I think India can do a lot of it unilaterally or in a bilateral negotiations. So therefore, I think what we do with Bangladesh, again, will once again be central. If we get that right, then a lot of additional stuff can be made along with it. So I would say, how do we reform our own national policies? That I think would be far more productive, rather than hoping somehow external organizations will solve it.
Thank you. I think we've run way out of time. I'm sorry if I could not, we could not address everybody's questions, but tried to do the best. And, I think here I have the duty to, on behalf of Asian Confluence, to thank all our esteemed guests, High Commissioner Green, Ambassador Bhatia, and Professor Raja Mohan, and of course the presence of the Consul General here. We look forward to doing more. On just one note, we had a meeting once 2 years back on SARIC at your High Commission, and I think one of the suggestions we had made was, if we can help get the support under the SARIC framework to convene more of regional, to talk more with the Bangladesh and, regional, how Australia can play a catalytic role, what you mentioned, in which can lead to projects happening. So that's something we would like to explore further. But on that note, thank you very much for coming, and I think you have noticed, High Commissioner, that there is a lot of appetite here for such kind of, and there's lots of questions, and there's a lot of real world concerns about the immediate neighborhood and the immediate proximity. We also do a yearly track with Japan here, and a lot of those big ticket projects, I think, under what you just mentioned, can Australia, India, we can have catalytic, effect on that. So, and also I wanted to make sure that the culture element, you talked about indigenous, there are people from the field of arts and culture. We don't have time today for them, but we also had a Padma Shri awardee here. I think she's just left probably just now, but no, of course, Kong Patricia, but also she called Singlit Pasha. So people from the arts. So on that note, thank you very, very much for this evening, for coming and gracing this evening, and thank you all for making it here and at this late hour. Thank you very much.